All right, I think we're ready, guys. We have Haven calling in. Who is it from Haven? It's Ahawk. It's Ahawk. As you can see, I don't know much about Haven. I know what they're trying to do, which sounds like an amazing idea, which is basically to create an anonymous stablecoin. So digital cash, but that's stable. It's interesting, and I guess we'll talk about how practical that is. We'll get into whether or not we think that's technically feasible. And then we have Thorchain. Awesome that we have both of these guys on right now, because there's an implementation that's being worked on where you'll be able to essentially, through a decentralized way, transfer between Monero and any other cryptocurrency, basically, that Thorchain is currently integrated with. And you guys recently integrated with Haven or not yet? Not yet. Right, so they're working on integrating with Haven. And once they figure that out, it should be theoretically relatively easy to figure out how to then integrate Monero. I should say Haven is basically built on the Monero protocol, right? It's a fork. It's a fork of the code. So the theory is, if we can figure out Haven, then we can figure out Monero, and then we're all on our cake wallet and we're anonymously moving between Monero and Haven or whatever other crypto asset is on Thor in a decentralized way. So very cool. I should want to thank Haven, actually. They were one of our sponsors. They sponsored one of our bars. I'm sure you saw the sign out there. And that's what allowed us to, basically offer endless amounts of mezcal for, $6 a cup, high-end stuff. So I hope you enjoyed it. All right, guys. I think we're good. You guys want to quickly do an intro?
The audio.
Well, I guess while we're waiting for a second, Mike, I'll my own intro here. So my name is Chad. I am the technical lead on the Thorchain project. And so what we're trying to accomplish is give people a non-KYC way to swap layer one real assets to other chains. And that is, right now, it supports 7 networks: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, BNB, Doge, and Terra. And we're looking to add more chains. And one of those chains we're working on actively with the Haven people, which can also lead the way to actually have support Monero as well. So you have a decentralized mechanism to be able to get in and out of it without requiring, Uncle Sam to give you permission to do so.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for the intro there. A really quick intro for myself. I'm Seth for Privacy. I contribute to Monero where I can, but mostly do privacy education and just kind of find the niche where I can help to just guide people along the privacy journey that I've been down. And obviously, oh, there we go. Nice.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Awesome. So it looks like we have Ahawk now. Can you hear us, Ahawk?
I can hear you. I just can't really hear you speaking on stage. That's all.
It's all right. We're talking bad about you, so it's fine.
Do you want us to move down there?
Yeah.
Or he can relay questions, I guess.
If you guys don't mind standing here.
Make it work.
No, this is good. Here, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, just work the same way.
Kind of doing this on the fly.
And then I guess try not to use the mics much, right?
Yes.
Yeah, talk. Yeah.
We want to do
that.
Hey guys, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. I'll just listen closely. I'll do my best.
We'll try to be nice and loud. I mean, we want everyone in the room to be able to hear as well. So hopefully it'll be clear for everyone.
Possibly imagine. So we've done some significant changes. That was like a long time ago, like back in 9-10 months ago, or something like that. So we've been operating very well for a very long period of time at this point. We're ready to kind of go from the chaosnet label to the mainnet level where we feel like it's been hardened enough that we feel pretty confident and secure. That doesn't mean there's no bugs. It doesn't mean there's no like potential problems in the future, obviously. But you'll never know that answer, right? Even Bitcoin had an exploit like 2 years ago, 10 years after it was actually launched, that had an infinite mint bug. So all software has issues and all software has vulnerabilities. There are none that have none. Do not confuse that.
Yep.
And so this is a question about how the team handles it and how do we come back from it. I think we did a really good job of that.
Awesome, thank you. And then from the Haven perspective, can you speak a little bit to the issues y'all had, your approach, and then just kind of how you're rebuilding trust with users of Haven and maybe pitching that trust to people in the Monero community?
Sure thing. Yeah, it's interesting. The timing is pretty similar. The exploit that Haven suffered was last summer, last June, around the same time that there were an exploit on Thorchain as well. Obviously, I think one thing that we recognized as a team and a community was that Monero is really difficult. Monero is challenging, as it should be. And I think the complexity of Monero led to, really difficult project to build. And we're trying to build on top of it, build something new, build something innovative, an actual true private stablecoin. And, we thought that we had the validation in place to ensure that the mint and burn process. So Haven works in a similar way to Luna and UST, where you burn XHV to receive XUSD and vice versa when you want to go back and forth. And we came up with a proof that was also contributed to by some in the Monero community that allowed the value of a transaction to be converted on chain and then burned and then minted into another asset. And that proof went through a bunch of testing and a bunch of auditing. And about a year or so after it went live, somebody found a bug in it, and it was based on the mint and burn protocol. And they were able to create an exploit that we quickly were able to shut down, do a post-mortem, figure out what went wrong, write a new validation, again with the help from some folks in the Monero community, have it audited by CypherStack, who's an incredible organization, and put the pieces back together and get the protocol functioning again, which it has been since last summer. So I think it's a good point, though, about building trust, about building reliability. That's what we've been trying to do with Haven piece by piece since we really launched in 2019, which is when this current community took over the project to try and get it done. And the mint and burn function has been live for a couple of years now. That exploit happened last summer, and we're really confident in the steps that have been taken since then, which include this, an audit, a new bug bounty program, a bunch of new eyes in the protocol that have been really helpful. So we're confident, but we have to keep working to build people's trust, and we're going to keep doing that. And appreciate the help from the Monero community that we've been given too so far.
Yeah. Thank you all for the answers. I know it's not a fun topic to start with, but
Good
wanted to get out of
question.
the way. Yeah,
Good question.
important that people understand that.
Yeah.
So diving a bit into the interoperability between the three chains and ultimately between Monero and Thorchain and maybe Monero and Haven. First off, can you tell us a little bit more about that process of integrating Haven with Thorchain and ultimately what that will bring to Monero's integration with Thorchain long term?
Is that for me or for him?
Why don't you kick it off and then he can fill in any details. Sorry.
So with the processes of like how one actually does it, or do you mean how it works from a technical perspective? Or
Maybe a little bit from a technical perspective, but then ultimately what that integration can provide to Monero users.
Yeah, sure. So in order for Thorchain to exist, in order to do what it needs to do, it needs to actually have a consensus and understanding of what actually is transpiring on the other chain, whether it be Bitcoin or Ethereum or Terra or whatever. And for Monero and for Haven, that's obviously a lot different because you have this ring signature thing and it's like really complicated and difficult, all these things. And so in order for it to function, the network has to produce view keys so they can understand all the transactions that are happening internally, so they can observe that, oh, this person sent 12 Monero in and wants to receive Bitcoin at this BC1 address or whatever. And then the outbound transaction needs to be kind of exposed onto the network and expose the private key of the transaction so that the network can come to a consensus that like, okay, the funds were actually sent. Right? So you need the entire nodes of the network to actually come to a consensus of what happened in order for it to function. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part of it. But fundamentally what that means for the community of the Haven community and the Monero community is that you can now trade from Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Terra, or whatever into Monero with any address that you choose and get out as well without actually going through, Trade Ogre or whatever exchange you're currently using to buy and sell Monero. So in my view, in order for Monero to achieve its vision, which I completely agree and like advocate for, like you personally, in order to get there, you can't have a private token that you have to ask, Coinbase or whoever hell it is to buy and sell it.
Yeah.
It just kind of defeats the point to some regard. And so in order for Monero to be successful, it needs a decentralized mechanism to get in and out of it that doesn't require you to give them your name and your passport information and your address and all this kind of shit. And so Thorchain is the only project right now that actually is capable of doing that right now, which I hope to see more in the near future. But to me, it's a game changing for what it can provide for Haven as well as Monero.
And a quick distinction there is the real key difference between Thorchain and something like Bisq or Haveno, et cetera, is that it's using a liquidity pool model rather than a peer-to-peer swap model. So
right. And so those models tend to be very, very illiquid. So if you want to move more than like $5,000, it becomes highly problematic, right? In Thorchain's case, because there's like $500 million of liquidity that's currently in the network today, you always have a counterparty to every trade the moment that you want. So if you want to sell Monero into Bitcoin or vice versa, you can do that right now in this second and then receive your Monero or receive your Bitcoin without waiting for some sort of counterparty to come, because the counterparty is always the liquidity pool at all times. It's really important for that. In order to have a higher liquidity scenario where you can easily get in and easily get out, you need that liquidity there. Otherwise, it becomes basically useless.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Any thoughts you want to add to that, Ahawk, maybe from the Haven perspective of the integration or the functionality?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chad can speak to the technical side so much better than I can. So I would just zoom out a little bit and share, why the Haven community, why we've been so focused on this integration for such a long time. And it's really because, as Chad just said, the need for anybody that's interacting with a privacy coin, whether it be Monero or Haven, to go through a centralized exchange is becoming a bigger problem every day. Centralized exchanges have done lots of things to prohibit people's ability to actually use private chains, to use Monero. They've delisted Haven, they've delisted Monero. Monero had a bit of a head start and is still on a good number of exchanges with great liquidity. But I think we can see what's going to be happening in the coming years. And we think the future of crypto really needs to be decentralized. The future of exchanging crypto needs to be decentralized. And for Haven, as a smaller project that is, a lot younger and still developing itself, we view liquidity as a really important goal. And we think that this integration with Thorchain is the perfect mix of creating a decentralized structure to be able to exchange private cryptos that you can't do anywhere else, and in a lot of places you can't do in centralized exchanges, and providing liquidity for projects like ours that provide something that's unique and that is default private at the end of the day. So we're really excited about it.
Yeah, awesome. And do you mind just introing a little bit about what else Monero users could do on Thorchain? Maybe liquidity provision is probably the main thing.
So another thing you can do on Thorchain would be that you can actually earn a yield on your Monero or your Haven or whatever, it doesn't matter. So one of the things that Thorchain is doing is that it's creating a DeFi protocol that is chain agnostic. It doesn't have like first-class citizens and second-class citizens as like Ethereum protocol tended to have, where if you wanted to use Bitcoin on Ethereum, you had to go through these like extra hoops and extra risk profiles, and it's kind of fucking stupid. So what we need to have DeFi to be what it should be completely agnostic to what chain or asset that we're talking about. So if you want to provide liquidity into Thorchain's network and earn a yield on your Monero and stack, Monero sats, whatever the sat is, I don't even know what the word is for that.
Piconero,
whatever that word is. You can do that, and that's actually an important component of of not just holding an asset, but being able to earn yield from that asset. Also very, very important.
Yeah, and we'll dive a little bit more into kind of the trust guarantees around liquidity provision and that kind of thing. But a couple of quick kind of paired questions for you, Ahawk, just around Monero and Haven and the relationship and just interoperability there. Can you tell me a little bit about how Haven has contributed back to Monero, which obviously ultimately is the source of the core of your protocol? And then maybe anything about any future plans for direct interoperability between Haven and Monero, like atomic swaps or some way that people can leverage both chains without any trust inherent.
Sure. I mean, one thing, first and foremost, is that our, the learning curve to start developing on Monero was pretty high, obviously. And we received a lot of help from folks in the Monero community as we navigated this and launched XUSD and our private assets. So we're really thankful that the two communities and projects have been able to work together. I mean, our developers, and we're a pretty small group. We have really 2 full-time core developers and a few that are part-time outside of that group, and a really big community that contributes. But in terms of developers that truly work on Monero and understand Monero, we're pretty small compared to the Monero community. But we've been able to contribute back and share some things in the Monero code base that have been used. I think one of the things that is important to us is on the Thorchain side is helping with the Monero integration that's in addition to ours, which I think will look a little different on the technical side. I'm probably not the one to speak to all of that, but they are going to look a little bit different, and we want to be as helpful as we can, because I think Thorchain would provide some pretty unique benefits for Haven's community, and I think some of those benefits might be different from Monero just because it's a bigger community, a more established project. But I think they would also benefit from being integrated, and so we want to help work on both. And I think that's a goal. I think the more options that people have to access chains with default privacy, the better for everyone. That's sort of our view. So we definitely want to work together to make that happen.
Thank you for that. And let's kind of pivot and talk a little bit more about the trust that's involved in using both Thorchain and Haven. And we'll start off with Thorchain. Can you just walk us through a little bit about what trust users need to have who are coming in with Monero, obviously once the integration is done in the future? What kind of trust or risks they need to be aware of when both providing liquidity and just swapping in and out of Monero with other assets?
Yeah, the swapping side of things isn't much because all that's operated by code. So that can be audited. You know what the risks are. You know how it all functions, and it can't operate any other way than that, right? So from a swapping perspective, there's really not that much risk, to be honest with you. From a LP perspective, there is more risk there because this gets into a kind of a complicated conversation. I don't want to get too much into it because it's going to confuse the fuck out of people. But like, whenever you're providing liquidity into Thorchain, you're providing 2 assets, which is either going to be Monero and Rune. Like the pool is always comprised of Rune and some other asset, Monero in this case, or Haven. And so you're exposing yourself to both of those assets and their price movements. And you can expose yourself to something called impermanent loss, which is something that's been around in AMM since like day one of Sushi, back in like 2017, I think it was, 2016, whatever it was. And so you have to understand that idea about like how the price movements of Monero and the price movements of Rune and how they can affect your yield. And so that there's an entire thing called LP University you can go to. There's an entire Discord dedicated to educate and inform people of these things. But I would always encourage people to make sure you know what you're getting into. Do your own research. Obviously, I'm an LP and I love it, but like that's just obviously my biased opinion. But you're welcome to read into it and dive into it more for sure.
Now, for swapping specifically, do users who do swaps ever lose custody of funds? I mean, it's not like an atomic swap, so I assume they're depositing Monero.
Yeah.
The swap is being performed. Funds are custodied, and then they're getting Bitcoin back.
Yeah, that has never happened. If it theoretically somehow happened, it would mean that there's a bug in the code and things didn't work. But the network has been situations where, for example, it picked a vault to send out the Bitcoin, and that vault was like offline because this node was out to lunch or something crazy. I don't know, I'm making something up. And then it just kind of rescheduled to another vault to send the funds. So worst case scenario, we've seen like things get delayed 30 minutes, but you always get your back funds. Like that's yet to actually happen where people did not actually get their funds in the swap.
So you do give up custody, but obviously the point of the protocol is that ultimately you get back the other asset
right.
if everything goes smoothly.
Yeah. It's all run by just like autonomously through computers. Like there's no person with a note sheet who's sending out your funds for it. It's all just completely autonomous.
Yeah. And
Chad, just real quick. I mean, I think the first time I used Thorchain, I was surprised at the level of security that was provided to me as an option, at least, when swapping between coins, right? So if I'm connecting from a DeFi wallet like XDeFi, or if I'm connecting from a ledger device, those swaps require me to get permission for the swaps to happen. But to your point, there could be stuff on the back end related to a node or the code having a bug that screwed up the swap. But in terms of providing permission and trust for the swap to happen, the user is still in control, which I was really happy to see as I started using Thor more frequently.
Yeah, definitely makes sense there. And one more question for you, and we'll pivot to Haven, is I know that the way that the actual holders of the multi-sig, where funds are stored during swaps and for liquidity provision, is done in a very transparent manner intentionally. Do you have any concerns around those multi-sig holders being pressured by law enforcement or governments to either expose transaction details of people swapping or to obviously confiscate funds long term?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not a multi-sig. It's actually just a different cryptographic approach called threshold signatures. And we're specifically using something called GG20. And so it's not actually the same thing of multi-sig, but it conceptually has some similarities. Now, your question is like, what are the odds that these people get confiscated, blah, blah, blah. And so that's a really good question. That's why we always advocate for all the node operators to just not dox yourself. I don't know who the validators are of the network, and I don't fucking want to know who the validators of the network are. And even in that scenario where they are attacked by regulators or whatever, and they give up all the Monero or whatever asset, there's always more liquidity at risk for those people than they actually ever have access to themselves as individuals, or even as a group of a threshold signature. And so even in the event that those one of these threshold signatures got like taken down by the regulators, blah, blah, whatever, the network would actually dump a bunch of room into all those pools that were lost Monero or Bitcoin ever. Arbitrage Plus would put all the Monero, all the Bitcoin, all the Ethereum back into those pools moments later. So even if it did happen in that situation, it still would be fine.
Yeah, thanks for diving in. I know it's a complex piece of y'all's approach and protocol, but helpful for people to see the details there, or at least a little bit of those. Now, for the Haven side, Ahawk, do you mind just kind of running through a little bit of how the decentralization of Haven is handled? Obviously, it's a much smaller project than Monero, but maybe quickly touch on how decentralized Haven is with respect to the oracles that are involved in the asset swaps, mining, general consensus rules, and then the code itself. I know it's a lot of topics, so we can go one by one if necessary.
Sure. Yeah. No, happy to. I'll give an overview, and if you have specific questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah.
I think Haven is certainly not perfectly decentralized. I think we have grown more and more decentralized over time since 2019, when essentially one person held a private repo of code didn't work. So since that time, we've become a lot more decentralized. The code is open source. The community has grown. Decision making has become more decentralized. The oracle we use is Chainlink, which is a gold standard in DeFi. But we have centralized elements. We have some things that can't be done by Chainlink that have to feed the pricing record into the chain for conversions to actually be able to happen on chain. And we certainly have a smaller group of team and developers, given sort of our grassroots non-VC start and mission. So I think that poses some challenges. We're working right now on really bringing in our community, which has exploded over the last year or two, into the actual decision making for the project in terms of what do we spend money on, what do we prioritize on the dev side, what are we going to launch, what are we going to focus on, and making those decisions in a more decentralized way is really important, and we're making progress there, although it's certainly not perfect right now.
Yeah, thank you. I think you touched on the majority of the points. Maybe if we can hone in a little bit on the Oracle question, because I know that's a common concern with people coming to Haven. I had a specific question from somebody who asked about the 3 Oracle servers that I guess are part of the code base and hard-coded in. But maybe you could go into a little bit more detail about how you ensure that those pricing records are valid. So when people are swapping assets within Haven, they don't have funds stolen or get given a bad pricing record and get less than they should, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So just real simply, the way it works is that Chainlink provides raw pricing data for, let's say, you're just doing an XHP to XUSD conversion. Chainlink has a pricing oracle for the aggregated price of XHP across all the exchanges, and they spit out a price that's validated on their side, and it changes based on a 1 or 2% move if the price changes. The problem with Chainlink is that they aren't able to provide that data in a way that we can put on chain. So there is a layer in between the price that Chainlink reports and the blocks that actually get mined for Haven and the info that has to be put in each block header. And that's a layer that isn't fully decentralized yet, which has been known for quite a while. And I think the challenge is we haven't found an Oracle provider, an Oracle service that can do all of those things at once. And we're looking for that, and we're trying to solve for that, because I think creating more trust in the Oracle process and the pricing record process is important. But the reality is in the setup that we currently have, if the pricing record it does not match the price, it's not going to be validated and a conversion won't be allowed. I think there's, certainly the risk that the team and developers that run the nodes that have the pricing records that are put onto the chain, if they decide to destroy the project they've been working on for 4 years, I guess that's a risk that we have right now, but I view it as a pretty low risk.
Yeah. Thank you for walking through that, and we'll kind of pivot a little bit into the privacy trade-offs or guarantees that come with both Thorchain and Haven, and we'll pivot back a little bit to Thorchain. And can you just give us a little bit of a walkthrough of what loss of privacy specifically, because I know y'all are pretty transparent about that, is involved when Monero users swap in and out of other assets on Thorchain? I know you mentioned view keys and key images earlier.
Yes.
But can you go into that a little bit more about what privacy they can expect to lose when swapping?
Right. Excellent question. So as a project, we early talked about the idea of privacy and how to implement that within Thorchain. But fundamentally, that's not a viable means of doing that because you're interfacing with chains that are not private. So if somebody swaps in Bitcoin and says, hey, send my Ethereum to this OX address, it's already been a dox at that point. Before it even got to us, it's already public information. And you could do asymmetric encryption with the validators to kind of encrypt it that way. But then the validators need to know where to send it, right? And so the problem with that is that running a node has an alternate purpose or value other than monetary or economic purposes. So the NSA or the FBI might run a validator, so this is like in SPY, and every transaction is happening through the network. And there's nothing we can really do, for my understanding. There's no mechanism we can actually do that. So we decided that instead of trying to build privacy, which is really fucking hard, by the way, I think we all know how hard that shit is, we instead rely on other people who are much more brilliant than I am, who've already built proven systems like Monero, for example, that can actually do the privacy aspect. So if you want to have privacy in Thorchain, you can actually pick your Bitcoin, send it to a Monero address, and then send it to another Bitcoin address on the outside, and that has no history or no data or anything that can be mined from that. And so we rely on the composability and the power of each individual chain that we interact with to provide significant value to the rest of the crypto ecosystem. And in this case, obviously, it's privacy.
Yeah, and ultimately for users who are like swapping from Bitcoin to Monero in the future, again, obviously the integration isn't live, but who are doing that swap, it's important to, just like a different kind of exchange, to withdraw from that wallet that you've used there. Because like you mentioned earlier, the view keys and key images of that swap and of that transaction are public information. So there's no privacy provided there. So you want to make sure to withdraw to another wallet to regain those privacy.
I would have a separate wallet that you interface with other exchanges, whatever. Just keep it clean and simple, and that way it's much more private.
Yeah. Any thoughts to add there?
So, I think that was a good way to describe the trade-off. I mean, it's in some ways it's similar to interacting with a centralized exchange that either you're KYC'd on or not, but at minimum has your address and the address that you're sending funds off the exchange to. That provides, a privacy risk, and ideally you're going to take an extra step and create another transaction to leave the address that the exchange is already aware of. I think the design that Haven has submitted to Thorchain essentially adopts that model. The address you use to interact with Thor when making a swap or providing liquidity would be able to be seen by a node on Thor's network. And so as a result, you need to essentially have a hot wallet that you interact with Thor on. And once you leave that hot wallet on the other end, you've regained all of the built-in privacy that Monero or Haven already has on chain.
Yeah. Thanks for delving into that a little bit more. And one more question around Thorchain privacy. I haven't explored this, so maybe there's a quick answer, but will the DEXs and the interfaces being built around Thorchain have either native Tor hidden services, or at least treat Tor users as kind of first-class citizens so that they can gain the network privacy, especially as they're exposing the on-chain privacy?
Sure. Now, excellent question. So none of the UIs that I'm aware of right now interface with Tor, Tor, or anything like this. But building a UI is relatively simple. Most of the code is actually open source. You can pull it down and re-implement it, right? So if you want to do that, build a UI that's privacy focused and operates behind Tor and all these kind of things, then go ahead, go crazy, go nuts. There's no you don't have to ask me for permission or any of these things. Anybody can build a UI whoever wants to. It's all free, open, transparent, all these things. But none of the UIs today are guided or thinking in that direction as privacy focused as this community tends to be, more than other communities tend to be.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for for that transparency there. Now on the Haven side, Ahawk, just any privacy gotchas or concerns when using Haven as compared to using Monero? I know it's based on the Monero protocol, but just want to give you a chance to share if there's any other kind of privacy issues that people need to be aware of with using Haven in specific ways.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's one or two important distinctions, right? So Haven uses Monero on the base layer. So any XHV transaction is going to operate the same as an XMR transaction. We're on an older version of Monero. We have worked for the last probably 3 or 4 months now to rebase to Monero version 17, which is just about done. I think in the next fork that we do, we will be forking to use Monero v17, which will be an improvement. We're always going to be a little bit behind Monero's latest version because as of now, it does require us to do a hard fork. I think in the future, there's some ways to solve that. But so in terms of base layer privacy, XHV it has all the similarities to the version of Monero that we're using that XMR would. The difference is in the conversion process, right? So when you burn XHV to mint XUSD, the one difference is that very early on in this process, our community decided to have a transparent supply of the X assets themselves, XUSD or XEuro or XPound. So when you burn your XHV for XUSD, you can see on chain how much XUSD was burned in that transaction or minted, vice versa. And you can't see the address, you can't see the balance, but you can see the data that allows you to track the public supply of the X asset. So that's probably the biggest difference. It was a trade-off that sort of was made as a decision early on, but I think it has been really helpful for us as we grow the ecosystem and Haven grows to be able to have a verifiable, auditable supply of the X assets themselves.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. And another question, kind of in the same vein, but maybe just sum up the core risks that users of Thorchain and then the users of Haven need to be aware of when using that specific project. I know we've touched on a lot of different specific areas, but maybe just sum that up so people can be aware of those going into using this project. Why don't you start with Thorchain?
The risk, probably the biggest risk in my mind is some sort of bug or exploit of some kind where funds are lost. I think we've done way higher and above than almost every other DeFi protocol in the space does. We have so many layers of protections. So that even if you find an exploit it, you won't be able to extract the funds properly. You've got some pretty clever things going on in there. But that's always going to be a concern of mine. It's always something 10 years down the road, I'm still going to be thinking about that.
Yeah.
You will never be guaranteed. It's always a known unknown whether or not there are more bugs or exploits in any piece of code, no matter who wrote it, when they wrote it, or anything. So that's always the biggest thing in my mind, personally. And people should be aware of, just be informed of what you're getting involved with at all times. I don't care if it's Thorchain or Monero or some other project. Always do your own research. Yep. I'm always available to ask questions too. If you guys want to tweet at me later or whatever, that's fine too. We do Twitter Spaces and stuff to help inform and educate people. But that's my first thing that comes to mind. Yeah,
and you mentioned liquidity provision and making sure that you understand
how
that works before going into it.
And there's lots of great resources for that. And I just encourage people to learn and educate. And if you're good for it and you want to get that, right now it's between 20 and 70% yield, depending upon which pool you're getting involved with. If you're good with that, then you're good with that.
Yeah. Awesome. And then from the Haven perspective, kind of what are the core risks that people should be aware of when using Haven?
Sure, I think Chad summarized it well. I mean, similar to every project in DeFi that is, in many cases, new, innovative, groundbreaking, doing things that haven't been done before. There's always the risk that there is an exploit or a bug that you're not aware of. I think you need to take a close look at, the team and community that have worked on the project. And I think in Haven's case, we've got a whole bucket of lessons learned over the last couple of years that have really made it a stronger project. And I would argue it's not anything more risky than anything else in DeFi. But with Haven, there's also other challenges like liquidity is a challenge. Exchanges don't want to list privacy coins. We've had a lot of difficulty getting Haven listed on traditional centralized exchanges. So if you're looking to have significant liquidity for your holdings, it's a challenge. Again, one of the reasons we've prioritized the Thorchain integration. But just like anything else, do your own research, understand what you're getting into. Haven can be complicated. It can feel that way, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple protocol. And I think that, we've been able to put together a lot of resources for people that are new to the ecosystem to take a look at and ask questions. That's the most important thing. We have a great community that's happy to answer questions, walk through troubleshooting as people are learning about the ecosystem.
Perfect. Thank you for diving into that. I know another not necessarily fun question or a hype question, but a good one to cover.
It's a fair question.
So closing out with the last question that I have for y'all is really just how do you see Thorchain and Haven enabling circular and parallel economies? You touched on it a little bit, especially with Thorchain and how it can enable people to get in and out of Monero easily long term. So maybe just touch on kind of how you see Thorchain empowering the things that Monero and its community are aiming for today.
Well, yeah, I think naturally what will happen is that once Thorchain and Haven kind of integrate, the trade volume of the Haven token will skyrocket, in my opinion, because it's such a quicker and easier and more privacy-focused mechanism to get in and out. I think that will just be a huge driver for that asset, and that's been true with almost every asset we've interfaced with. We just increase trade volumes for that because it just gives availability to more people more easily.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And then from the Haven perspective, kind of how do you see Haven enabling and furthering the mission that obviously the Monero community and project have in mind?
Absolutely, yeah. We're really focused on the stablecoin market, and I think if you take a step back and look at all the stablecoins out there, one thing that they have in common is that none of them are private. And I think UST has gotten closest to the most decentralized vision of a stablecoin. But at the end of the day, none of them are private. And certainly none of them have Monero privacy at their core. So I think the biggest value that we see in integrating Haven with Thorchain is that it allows anybody in the world access to a private stablecoin, which they otherwise don't have unless they have actually started using Haven and using the Haven Vault, which is a barrier for lots of new people. So giving people the option to use a stablecoin that also protects their anonymity, that allows them to keep their addresses and balances private, is something that's just not available to most people. And once we finish the technical side of the integration, the liquidity that Thorchain can provide can really create a bunch of new opportunities for people in the private stablecoin space, which is what we're really excited about.
Awesome. Thank you, Ahawk. Do we have time to do any questions in here? Or do we need to move on?
We got to keep going because we might get kicked out of here as early as 10:30. They want us out by 11, so that might mean they start at 10:30. I'm hoping we can keep going past 11.
Can I make one plea?
Yes, go ahead.
I have one plea for the Monero people, and I pray to God you fucking help me out over here. So we would love to see Monero integrate with Thorchain, but the problem is, from a technical perspective, is that the operature of the memo in Monero is limited to 16 bytes, which is like crazy small. I can't even fit a Bitcoin address in that thing. So we use that operator, that memo, to embed your transactional intent. I'm sending in Monero and I want to swap it to Bitcoin. And here's my EC1 address or whatever. So if I can convince the Monero community to increase that memo size beyond 16 bytes to maybe like Bitcoin's 80 bytes, that would be so much better. Otherwise, if you don't do that, we can still interface, but like it would be a different system where you have to transact on Ethereum first, and then you come back to Monero, and then you do your swap, and it becomes so much of a user experience hassle. But yeah,
is that code? Who's that? I can't see. Yeah, well, let me give you your mic. Hold up. Right to the source.
TX extra is not validated, so you can have unlimited number of bytes.
in the operator,
TX extra, which is the arbitrary
okay.
text.
I was told by some developers that it was 16 bytes only.
The prior discussion was that there's talk of deprecating that in the potentially the TF factor field. So there was a potential different route of doing it, which would probably take some re-architecting of Thorchain.
Yeah, it would. You're saying right now it's more than 16 bytes? Is that what
It's the same container.
Oh, okay. I thought Aven was 250 bytes.
No limit.
Yeah. All right, great, fantastic. Never mind.
So now your plea is don't change.
Yeah, don't change it to 16 bytes.
Please don't put that bunch of data into the box.
we only there's specific memos that are specifically structured in specific ways. We don't just like throw gobbledygook, crap. Right? And each individual can make a choice for themselves, like whether or not to use it or not. Yeah.
All right, straight to the source on that one. Anything you want to add, Seth? Okay. Yeah, we heard from those guys, and they most certainly know their stuff. So, anything else you want to touch upon?
Good.
All right, we're gonna move it along.